Excellent. So welcome. We are going to talk through kind of 3 steps to rock analyzing and interpreting data with your students this year. Hopefully everybody has been able to get into the shared resource document. Let me put it again one more time in the chat for those that are participating synchronously in real time here. I would like to encourage you all that are joining us live, if you would like to change your Zoom name to your first name and pronouns, we will be going into breakout rooms during this session. So this is not an hour and a half of sit and get, but we will be doing things and talking and engaging and reflecting different pieces like that. So if that is something that is of interest to you, to help sort of create space and get to know people quickly to be able to share out with your peers here on the call, I encourage you to do that. Please make your own choice about video. I mentioned at the beginning, for those that joined in, my internet has been a little bit wonky, and so we are going to hope that my video and audio on holds for this hour and a half, but please make your own choice. Because we are recording for those that could not join live, I'm just going to ask that you stay muted, except for when you've got a question and you want to jump in, because I really encourage questions and want to encourage you all to ask questions. You can type them in the chat, you can unmute and voice them, whichever feels more comfortable for you, but we'll just try to keep kind of one of our lines going at a time for that clean recording. We have got an hour and a half that we are going to spend together to talk about some different steps, explore some different pieces. So I encourage you to participate fully and openly for yourself, but also inclusively for others on the line. So for some of us, this might be a little bit of a review and we're thinking about it from a different angle. For some of us, this might be totally different. For some of us, this might feel really easy, and for others, it might feel really uncomfortable. And wherever you're at is where you should be, and we welcome you there. And we just want to create a space where everybody can get out of this hour and a half what they are interested and hoping to gain from this hour and a half. There are a lot of similarities. We are all choosing to spend 90 minutes together, either in the evening if you're on the East Coast, or in the late afternoon on the West Coast, or wherever in between those two extremes are, that you are on a Monday in February, which is crazy, and it's so wonderful to be here with you all. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for jumping in. So there are similarities within our group, but there are also some key differences. We work with different learners. We might teach different subjects. We might teach at different grade levels. And even if we taught the exact same subject to the exact same grade level, the students are different. And my fifth period and my 7th period were different, even within the same building. And so just kind of a reminder for us to use our I statements. So those are my kind of setting the stage. Bob, love that you've kind of jumped on. Join us for how long that you can. For everybody, join for as long as you can. I will be sending the recording for today's session out afterwards. Please walk off when you need to, do what you need to do. That's all part of sort of setting the norms of this container that we are creating. So as we are coming off of our Monday and all of the different pieces that came your way as you were joining in, as you came kind of back to the week and started the week, I just want to help us kind of land here together at this time that we have chosen to spend together. And so just have some questions. You can give a thumbs up in Zoom land. You can put a yes in the chat, but some way to interact and sort of respond of how are these questions landing for you. So curious if this resonates with you. Are you sometimes baffled by what your students do with data? Anybody has some like, what's going on when your students are working with data? Okay, I'm seeing yes, maybe exclamation marks, seeing some yeses come through. Excellent. Okay, not excellent that it's baffling, but excellent in that you are among peers. You are not alone. It is not only you. What about anybody have some confusion around the claims their students make when they are looking at a graph? Like you're looking at the graph, the visualization, the map, and you see one thing, and then these words come out of your student's mouth or come in on their worksheets or in their digital notebooks, and it just feels like you're speaking two different languages or you're looking at two different visualizations. Okay, I'm seeing some thumbs up for that. Does that resonate for anybody else on the call? Yes, excellent. Okay, great. Again, you are not alone. You are among peers. This is something that many of us are struggling with our learners. Okay, now here's my next question. It's been so much fun. I've been playing in the AI space, looking forward to today's call. How many of you are wondering how we can get this AI thing, elephant in the room, exciting opportunity, however you might think about AI, to relate to data and teaching our students how to make sense of data? Anybody interested in that? Of like, what is this connection of AI and data and teaching our students to make sense of data? Okay, seeing some yeses, seeing some thumbs up. Okay, I am so excited to share out some of the things that I've been playing with and tinkering with and create a space where we can share out with one another about that piece. Like, how can we take this reality of like AI exists, our students know about it, how can we leverage it to our advantage to help us work smarter, not harder, and sort of help with some of those ways that our students are get baffled or things like that. So some common things that we often hear about what students are struggling with or what I experienced with my middle school students or high school students when I was in the classroom that I still experience with some of my undergrad students are things like the students just don't get it when it comes to graphs or patterns, or they need lots of hand holding with their CERs or developing their conclusions from the data. And that even when I like step by step walk them through, I feel like I can't make it any easier for them to figure it out. The students still struggle with it when it comes to making sense of the data or drawing a conclusion from the data. And then like some students get it and other students don't, and sometimes they get it in one unit and not in another unit, and different pieces like that, and it can be really confusing. So that's the space that I live in a lot, on the kind of work that I do with teachers across the country in different schools and districts, where we're getting on and we're thinking about how to kind of make sense and simplify and make this a bit easier when our students are working with data, because that is so exciting. It's what my job is these days, of getting to work with teachers, educators around the country and think about how do we take this critical skill, making sense of data for our students, and help our students gain that skill in an already really packed curriculum, in an already really busy school day, in a reality of our field where it just seems like the list is growing and growing and growing of all the things that we are being asked to do for our learners. How do we do that so it actually feels possible and manageable? So a little quick sort of aside as to like who I am and how I came to do this every day, of like, how do we make that feel easier and feel more possible? So as I mentioned, I was a middle school and early high school. I taught grades 5 through 9. It was a very strange district that I was teaching in. So I sort of hit all of the typical grade bands on where I was across the different positions over the years. And I taught science. And then I was asked to teach social studies because that's how it went in my district. And I loved it. I loved teaching, but I was sort of always on this itching of like, how do we get kids working with more data, you know, making sense of data, things like that. So I landed in the realm of like, well, maybe we just need better lessons. And so I spent a lot of time kind of building out lesson plans and designing them. And I have to say, like, it's really fun to design lesson plans. It takes, it takes time. I did not do it during the year while I was with my students. But then I sort of struggled with where I was like, well, I actually think like everybody needs to tweak and adjust this lesson plan for who their students actually are, for where it's actually landing in their curriculum and things like that. And then I kept hearing like, well, if I just had better data sets. So then I went down this path of like, okay, what if I just work on finding data sets and helping people access data sets and get data sets that work for their teaching and their learning and their students of where they're actually at. And that's great too, but that is actually really tricky. There are a whole host of more people that are building out data sets. Thank you to building out these repositories of where we can find data sets related to our curriculum. But it wasn't like quite hitting hitting my stride of what was really making me excited about getting data to our students. It didn't feel like just a lesson plan or a data set or even a data set library was kind of getting to that piece. And I was struggling. I was kind of going around in circles and being like, maybe I should give up this side hustle thing and just go back to focusing on my students and working on that. And then this landed in my mailbox. Some of you have seen this already. For those that haven't, this is my electricity bill from May of 2019. And I would just like to point out, it is a double y-axis. I have lots of opinions about double y-axis. Happy to talk about them if you would like later. But the weather, the temperature, the air temperature was pretty much the same in May of 2018 as it was in May of 2019. But look at how much more my electricity company wanted to charge me for electricity in 2019 as opposed to 2018. Now this came through. First off, I had the like, what? You want us to pay how much for our electricity? And my partner and I went back and we were like, is there something wrong? Is our unit wrong? Like, we weren't running the heat, we weren't running the air conditioning, because in New Jersey, you don't need either in May. So we couldn't figure out like where this problem had come from. And so we called. We noticed that May 2019 seemed really off. It did not fit the pattern based on the air temperature in New Jersey. Turns out they had read the meter wrong. And so that's when I had my light bulb moment of, oh, wait. This is more than just one lesson, one data set, or one group of data sets or lessons. This is a bigger thing. And it needs sort of a different way to think about how we simplify and how we bring it in to everything that we're doing in ways that are small, that our students can build on over time. So that's when I took the leap and I left that full-time salary job with benefits and started DataSpire, which was super fun and I love every minute of it. But in all focused around kind of what are some strategies? How can we work on this? And those are some of the strategies that I'm super excited to share out with you today. And the strategies constantly change because the world is changing. And so that's why I was excited and I'm super excited to get in and talk with you guys about AI and how can we use that with our students. So just a little bit of a background and story of kind of who I am and how I got to be here. Excited to share out some of these strategies. Excited at the end to share out an upcoming opportunity for the summer if you're looking for some more and want to dive in deeper. If not, that's totally fine, but just want to kind of mention that out and share that as an opportunity as we're going forward. So let's dive in. Step one, for helping our students make better sense of their data, have less baffling claims, have less confusing work when they're working with graphs, is helping them realize that working with data is a process. It is not a checklist. It is not a like, check, I made the graph and I'm done. But that they are actually actively a part of making sense of data. They have to engage with the process. And when we're in that process, there are always three components, three steps or realms that we are working on when we're working with data. We need to have data to look at. So there's getting data. It is either students collecting it or they can use data somebody else has collected, but there has to actually be data. They need to explore it, start to figure out what's there, and then we infer meaning from it. And these three pieces are always there. And this one in the middle is the key one for our students as they are working on it. They often think this middle puzzle piece is us, as the teachers, as the facilitators that are learning, telling them what to do. Or they think it's Google Sheets, because I'm just gonna like put it into Google Sheets and then it'll do it for me and then I can fill out, answer the questions that my teacher's asking me to answer. But so switching the script, flipping the script so that they're like, oh, I am a part of this process. It does not work without a human. Never, never, never. Data always requires humans, even if AI is processing the data. Data always requires humans to look at and make sense of it. And as we are working into these three realms, there are different things that we do. So kind of things we do when we get data, when we explore data, when we infer meaning from data. This is a lot. In no way, shape, or form should we be doing every single one of these things when our students are working with data. And that's why what I was saying earlier of like, how do we chunk it smaller? How do we make it in these small bite-sized pieces that we can integrate into the things that we're doing? And through exposure and time and repetition and iteration, our students build these skills out as they're going through. It is very easy for us as experts who know how to make sense of data to talk about data in this very linear process. Well, you get data and then you explore it and then you infer meaning from it, but it is not linear. This process, remember, it's not that linear checklist. It's this like gobbledygook, swirly mess of we start and we stop and we go back and we start again and we come in from a different direction. It's not linear, and helping our students realize that is the reality it's not that they've done something wrong, but that this is actually what's involved in making sense of data can be a really key piece to empower them to build that self-confidence, that self-efficacy of, oh, I can do data, I can work with it, and it's an I need to be a part of this. It's not just a like, oh, I'm just going to answer this question and move on. That's the sort of empowering piece. That's how we can engage them in and help them connect in with the data. So that's just kind of a broad overview of kind of a big picture of like what actually goes in to making sense of data. What is the process of working with data? So as I mentioned, we're going to do some breakout rooms. I'm going to open them up, and these are the questions that I'm sort of posing that you discuss with one another in your breakout rooms. If you do not know each other, please introduce yourselves to create space. But I just want to give you all some time to think about, like, when it comes to students making sense of data, your students that you work with, what are your goals? What is it you would love to see your students be able to do? And then what is your reality right now? Because this is a space, right? At the beginning, we talked about like, you're not alone. Many of us are feeling a little confused or baffled about what our students are doing. And so like, let's just put it out on the table. Like, what is it we want that we're striving for? Why have we decided to spend an hour and a half of our evenings together? And then, but then what's the reality, right? We got to sort of think about both of those two pieces. And so what I'm going to invite that you do is that you jump in to our shared resource document. I'll put it in the slide again. Apologies, I'm scrolling. So up here on the bottom of page 1 and the top of page 3, I'll actually add another row right here. So just take a notice of your breakout room number. And then as you all are going through, if there's some commonality in your goals or reality, if you're like, oh, I'd never thought of that, something that your colleague mentions, jump in and drop it here in the table, because that's a way that we can share across kind of our different breakout rooms and build this community of all of us interested in supporting our students as they are, working to make sense of data going forward. So thinking about our students making sense of data and thinking about what are our goals. I'm a lead with the positive type of person. And then what is reality? It doesn't actually matter what order you all talk about it. And we'll take about 10 minutes to connect with one another on this. Are there any clarifying questions before I open the breakout rooms for you all? Okay. Can take a few moments to type. So if you've got them, just let me know. I'm going to open the rooms and I will see you all in about 10 minutes. Thanks, everyone.
Came from a large population of multilingual learners.
Oh,
Cool.
that you both came from a population of large multilingual learners, or?
That was pretty cool.
Yeah, great. So there were some like great connection points of some similarities that maybe you weren't expecting prior to landing in the breakout room. Awesome. Fantastic. Want to open it up for others. Were there other sort of surprising overlaps or alignments as you all were having your conversation of what goals you have or what reality you have for your students when it comes to making sense of data that folks would like to share out with the full group?
Supreet and I were just yammering about how funky middle schoolers are. And then also talking about just our goals of like, again, just really wanting to help students be able to tell the stories of graphs better, and then also decide how best to tell their stories using graphs without needing so much help or assistance from teachers.
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Dana. Great.
Laura may have some notes from our chat.
Don's like, Laura, would you like to share?
You noticed that.
Well, I wasn't going to. I was waiting for Dawn to share. But we were talking about how the students often just quickly answer the question, or like the word he used was mechanical, or like they skim the surface. And I had to laugh because just this past week I fell into something where we were doing reaction times and how quickly you could catch a meter stick as it fell. And like one would throw them off. So when we did the average and they could see all their numbers up on the board, they're like, no, that one number, that one time, it wrecked my average, because they're so competitive. And I was like, oh, so average isn't the best way to look at this then. And they were like, but that's all we know. So at least I feel like I got them hooked and intrigued a little bit to see like what other ways can we look at data.
I love it. I love like leaning into, okay, you're super competitive. Let's kind of run with that a little bit to have that. Wait, this isn't what I was expecting. Or no, that doesn't actually like, that gets in the way of my competitiveness as a broadening, opening up the conversation around data. And maybe it isn't always mean or the average. Maybe we should look at the median or the mode or things like that. Those words they learned way back in math class that they often forget about. Awesome. Love it, Laura. So some things that I was seeing as you guys were putting into the table as they were coming through, and want to pick up on, Laura, what you just mentioned of John saying like it's sort of mechanical. They're like kind of just at the surface level. Sometimes when our learners are working with data, and kind of pull that thread a little bit more out as we're thinking about kind of specifically, like we were talking like, okay, so these are strategies to help students analyze and interpret data. So let's think about describe and analyze patterns. And I just want to pause for a moment and be like, analyzing data, describing the patterns, analyzing data, understanding what is on the page is cognitively different than interpreting it and inferring meaning and understanding what it could mean or why that is the case. I just wanted to pause and kind of hold space for that. These two verbs we often throw out. Unfortunately, we sometimes use the verbs to mean opposite things across our subject areas, but it's two different things for our learners. They are novices. They are building these skills. We as experts do them almost simultaneously without realizing it. And so this is where it gets a little tricky, where we have some of those like, I'm looking at this visualization and they are saying things that are just really different than what I would be looking at, or what I am noticing, or what I am paying attention to. So we're gonna look at some graphs. You all teach in different spaces with different learners and different subject areas. So I tried to grab sort of a range of graphs. You are not needing to look at every single one of these, but I just picked 4 options. And what I'm going to ask that you do is you pick one. So solar heating, Finch's, pH of analytes, or these water pie charts. They go together. They are two, but they go together. So just pick one of them and just do a little bit of thinking. We're just going to spend about 2 minutes thinking about kind of what do you see in the graph that you selected, and what might your learners see in the graph that you selected. And so these are in our shared resource document. If you scroll down, oh my goodness, they dropped all the way down to page 4. So this is where the figures, where the visualizations are. And then I've got these questions of like, what do you see? What do your learners see? I will pull the slide back up if that's easier than kind of scrolling up and down the shared resource document. But just pick one. You don't have to look at all 4. Just pick one and think about kind of, okay, on an initial look, like, what do you see in terms of the patterns in this visualization? And what might your learners see? Okay, 2 minutes. I'll stay unmuted and maybe you can hear the piano lesson that's going on downstairs. Fantastic. Let's take about 20 more seconds, sort of capture that last thought we have. We can write it out if we're writing, or just think through it. Awesome. Excellent. So I'm seeing maybe it's Anonymous Buffalo kind of writing like we'd see the same similar pattern, but maybe we'd have different words to talk about it or different languages to talk about it. Some of our sort of thinking about what we see versus what our learners might see, it differed a bit. We were paying attention to potentially other things, other parts of the visualizations than we anticipated that our learners might be paying attention to. And this comes down to the kind of, we are experts, we have looked at data a lot, and our students are novices. They are still coming at it. And when we are a novice, we look at the surface level of things. And when we don't have a lot of confidence or comfort in our skills or in what we're supposed to even be paying attention to, we can spend a lot of time at the surface. We can talk a lot about colors, or we can talk a lot about kind of, well, if it's a line, or if I understand what's written in the the title, or if the axes have labels, and these are all important things, but they're sort of the frosting of our visualizations, right? The data is the middle. Sorry, I'm mixing my analogies. Okay, we're going to think about a data visualization as a cupcake. So the data is the cake of the visualization, And oftentimes our students can kind of get caught on the like frosting and the sprinkles. They're just looking at the top and they're kind of just focusing on those pieces. And sometimes that's an indication that they don't really understand that there's cake down below that frosting. That might have been a really bad analogy. I just thought of it on the fly, maybe because I'm starting to feel a little hungry. But okay, so pulling out of that potentially bad analogy, you all can drop in the chat what you think about that analogy of the cupcake and the frosting. Look, when we're looking at things and when we're a novice, when we're looking at new things, we go through this visual hierarchy of we need to register that there is visual input. Our eye needs to recognize that something is coming in for those of us that are visually able. And then we hit a point where, okay, so something's coming in and we get to a pattern recognition. So here in this framing, pattern means this is a square, or this is a rectangle. I am comfortable, I have seen this rectangular shape before. And then we hit visual memory where we're like, oh, I've seen this visual rectangle and I remember that it can do things. It can make noise and it maybe sometimes lights up and things like this. And then we move to the visual cognition of, oh, right, it is my cell phone. So we do not do that every time we look at things. Once we have gotten to the point where we have built the mental models for the visual things that we look at, we can jump from, we have a recognition of the visual input, and then basically we're like, almost instantaneously, we jump up to the visual cognition. This is what we do with data visualizations. And this is not what happens for our learners when they work with data visualizations. They don't have that rapid up to the visual cognition of making sense of it necessarily. So let's think about this in terms of reading. So when we read, we learn our letters. So we're down at this visual recognition input of there's a J, there's an A, there's an M. We say these words, we say these letters over and over again. There's often very colorful visual things for us to look at that are visually able in classrooms, in classroom spaces where people are learning the alphabet. And then we need to get to this pattern recognition space of this is the J, this is the M, this is the W. So understanding the orientation of how that visual piece is and how it sits and which way we orient to it, to then think about building up in our visual memory and our visual cognition of, oh, okay, so when we put J-A-M together and we know the sounds that a J, A, and M make, and if we give a visual reminder of what this might be that they have seen before, then we can step students in to learning how to read. We do not hand them Harry Potter and be like, have at it, learn how to read, right? We step them into it. And we can do the same thing when it comes to data visualizations. And when our students are kind of skimming across the top and kind of at a surface level of just paying attention to color or titles or again, the like, it wiggles, but not kind of getting at the like, well, but how does it wiggle? And actually the Finch's goes up and then it comes down, so that actually, although it wiggles, it starts and stops at about the same population level from year 0 to year 5, and getting to that deeper space of thinking in and looking at the visualizations might be that they don't know the patterns to look for. And there are 5 common patterns that show up a lot. I'm going to kind of walk through these quickly just to sort of showcase them. It's not exhaustive. There are more than these 5, but these are 5 that like about 85% of the visualizations that we work with in the K-12 space, our students are looking at these kinds of patterns in their visualizations. So we've got are increasing or positive or ascending, because we talk about this pattern in different ways at different grade levels and across different subject areas. But in essence, what it is as one variable increases, the measured value for the other variable increases. Or as we're comparing across categories, if these categories are ordered in a way that is relevant for the data, that we see an increasing amount as we go through our categories in our bar chart or in our bar chart or our pie chart. The flip side of that is decreasing or negative or descending, where as one variable increases as time passes, the other variable decreases as we go through. We see these a lot. We kind of recognize this, oh, as a decreasing or oh, as a negative pattern instantaneously, but do our students know that this is a pattern they might see? This is often referred to as no pattern, but actually what it is as one variable increases, the other variable stays pretty much the same. It stays stable across. So this is a pattern. One is changing, the other is not. Or across all of our different categories, there is not actually a noticeable difference between what we are seeing across our categories when we're looking at a bar chart. So it's not no pattern, it's a stable pattern. Similarly, another thing that often gets called a no pattern is variable, whereas like one is changing, the other is changing, and who the heck knows which direction it is going. They do not seem to be linked together. This might be a like, whoop, whoop. There is a confounding factor going on, like there's another variable that we might want to look at, or a like, whoop, whoop, like, the variables we picked, actually, there's not a relationship between the two of them. We see this a lot when students go to do science fair projects. They get variable patterns and then they're like, something's broken, I did something wrong, or I need to collect more data. Sure, we can always collect more data. Or maybe just we didn't actually collect the data on the things that are connected to one another. If we're looking at cause and effect, maybe there is no cause and effect between the things that we looked at. And then this last one is what we were looking at with the finches, of that there's a cyclical or a seasonal pattern. And so it goes up and down in a similar cadence. It can often be over time. In the environmental sciences, earth and environmental sciences, we call this seasonal, but this also happens in physics with waves and things like that, which does not necessarily need to be over time. And so we have this up and down on a cadence as it's going through. Again, we as experts, we see these patterns, these underlying patterns, regardless of what the variables are that are in the visualization. So we can jump into a visualization and we are orienting to, okay, so what are the variables? What are on the different axes? How is it coded color-wise? But then our eyes quickly jump to and what are the actual data values? Where are the bar heights? Where are the dots? Where are the lines? And we're pulled into that piece because we have this underlying, we've built the pattern recognition and we have the visual memory to jump to the visual cognition when we're looking at a visualization. So the question is, do our learners have that? Or are we in essence trying to jump them from here, look at this thing, and we're expecting you to get to visual cognition, but you haven't yet had the time to build up that pattern recognition and the visual memory of this is stable, this is increasing, these kinds of patterns and components to it. So thinking about that, thinking about your students, the kinds of different patterns, maybe you see 2 of those 5 or 3 of the 5, or maybe even 5 of the 5 in your curriculum that you do with your students. But just pause for a moment. We each work in different spaces, so we're going to do this individually, and just think back to like, okay, so what could be a takeaway for your learners as it relates to these patterns and how that might connect to the conversation that you were just having in the breakout rooms of the goal versus the reality on helping your students make sense of data. So you can do this in the chat if you would like. If you would like to sort of drop your capture your thoughts right in, like Anonymous Wolf is, into our shared resource document, that also works. Either place is totally fine, but let's just take a few moments and kind of think about how does this thinking about our visual hierarchy, those of us who are visually able, as we are looking at something, do our students have all those steps to accomplish the visual hierarchy when it comes to the patterns that they're looking at, those common patterns that we might see, or the pattern that might exist in any individual, any particular data visualization we're having them look at. Okay, I'm gonna stop talking for about 2 minutes so you guys can reflect and think about it and jot your notes down wherever you'd like. Awesome. So we've got some great reflections coming in on sort of a focus on patterns. Dawn saying might help students just pause and consider before they're just in like, I'm just going to execute mode, right? And we might create that moment of, oh, wait, take a step back before we kind of jump in and are just on the like, how can I be done? How can I finish what I'm doing? Execute through. I see somebody else commenting on like using a science journal and having students kind of match different patterns to hypotheses they have, but now their brain is thinking about, oh, okay, so we have increasing and decreasing and stable, but where does variable come in? And how do we create space for that for our students as they're working in that space? Or Supreet's commenting on like baby steps and sort of building over time, right? That idea of the scaffolding that we all integrate into our content, and thinking about how we can bring that to the data visualizations, to the data work that our students are doing as well. Love it. Super exciting to think about this and think about kind of how do we sort of remember that we are experts. We have been doing this for a long time. We have these mental models. We can work through this visual hierarchy really quickly, but our novices, our learners, are still building that in. Anybody's students love bar charts? Yes? No? There's like bar chart a like go-to favorite graph type for any of your students? Zoom thumbs up or yes in the chat. Too many exclamation point. Always I'm seeing this come through. Well, lots about bar charts. One of the reasons why our learners love bar charts is because they have been seeing them since kindergarten. So they have that mental model, data bar chart. So in some ways, it's an exciting thing that they always make bar charts for us. The problem is that we need them to get other graph types. We talk about that in the boot camp and other things. We've got all sorts of strategies around how we get students to make other things besides bar charts. But I just wanted to bring it up as a like some of that constant going to the bar chart is that they have created that mental model of data bar chart because they've seen it so many times. They've built that connection, which is great, except when it's not, which is basically from like 4th grade on, and we want them to be looking at other data visualizations many times. Bar charts still show up obviously after 4th grade, but we want more visualizations than just bar charts. Okay, so if that's kind of a strategy or a nugget or something to think about when it comes to describing and analyzing patterns, let's jump to this other side. Let's think about the interpret data to learn something, that other verb, that other cognitive piece of what we are doing when we work with data. And many of us use claims evidence reasoning. If you don't just think of CER as conclusions, it takes up less space on the slide. And so trying to keep things big for us to be able to see. So making a claim, drawing a conclusion from what we're looking at is something we do a lot. This is something our students have learned and is reinforced every year. They are learning it from kindergarten and first grade on as they're reading text and looking at prose. So they read the text, or they're looking at the text, and then they identify, like, what is the conclusion? What's the takeaway? How can we summarize what's going on? When we are reading for a content area, we then connect it to that content. If we're just reading for fun, we just think about, like, oh, what's the story? What's happening? How can I summarize what's going on? This can be a kind of a linear process of we get the information in, we make sense of it, and we connect it to our content. But when we're working with data, what we see is that oftentimes our lesson plans or our learning activities that we have for our students follows this linear pathway of, we're going to give our students some data and a visualization, and we're going to ask them to make a claim out of it, and then we will connect it to our content. But turns out cognitively, this is not actually how even our brains, as expert brains looking at data, is making sense of the data. Instead, it's this intersection of the content of what we're looking at, the for what, with the visual, which is the how we're looking at the data, and the data itself, the with what. It is the interconnection of all three of these together that we process as we're making sense of data. So we can't just look at, like, okay, here's our data, now come up with a claim, and then connect it to the content. We need to connect these pieces together. And cognitively, there are different things that we do. When we're connecting our content and our visuals, we're engaging with what is on the page. When we're connecting our visuals and our data, like the actual data values with the visual representation of it, we are starting to see kind of what is the pattern. I have no idea why there's a T hanging out there. Sort of what is on the page? What are we seeing in the data? And then as we're sort of making sense of that data, what we were just talking about of the, like, what is actually the pattern? What's going there? And connecting it to our content, that's the interpret piece. That's the, like, so what? What does it mean? How do we make sense of it? And along the way, cognitively, there are different pieces that we do as we are making sense of it that sets us up for success to draw a conclusion from the data. I know I went through that really quickly. You have access to this resource where you can see all of those questions. Feel free, there's a link in the resource document to access it. You can jump in. We dive into this more deeply in our summer workshops of kind of what does this mean and how to unpack it. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage of, very often we ask our students to be like, okay, so here's some data, here's a visualization. What does it mean? Let's interpret it. How does it connect to our content? What is your claim? Give me your evidence and your reasoning statements from it. And it doesn't always go so well. Our students often get tripped up. Sometimes they get tripped up at the claim phase. Sometimes they get tripped up at the evidence phase. Lots and lots of times they get tripped up at the reasoning spot. We're not going to talk about the reasoning much right now, but I want to show how we can use AI to sort of help think about how do we create more scaffolds, more resources, more opportunities for our learners as they're building this claims and evidence piece, as they are building out how to work with the data. Because I should say, this is another moment where, so back to that visual hierarchy, we pretty much jump from like visual input to visual cognition because we've done it a lot. We've built the mental models. We have the visual memory. For this, when it comes to interpret, we do engage and analyze pretty much simultaneously, instantaneously when we look at a visualization. And so we jump, as experts, we jump really quickly to interpret. And our learners don't necessarily have those stepping stones along the way. So how can we use AI to help build in some of those stepping stones? How can we use AI to look at what we currently have for our worksheets, for our prompts, for the questions that we're asking our students, and get them to have it sort of generate some options? So this is what I've been playing around with, and then we're going to kind of open it up to be like, what else? How else can we do this? So what I did was I was thinking about this, the solar heating graph, one of those visualizations that we were looking at earlier. And basically, I just put into ChatGPT, can you give me 5 examples of sentence starters? And this I actually left really open. I was like, okay, so we have this visualization where there's an increasing pattern in the data. How can I create some sentence starters that I can use, that I can integrate in to the worksheet that I already have? Maybe this is all of your learners need help. I would hope that most of your learners are pretty good at this increasing pattern. I just sort of started here as one for us to start with, but maybe not. Or maybe you have some students that are doing really well, kind of that coming back to like some get it and some don't. And so maybe this could be a way we could use AI. This took all of about 23 seconds for me to kind of type in this prompt. You will have this, type in this prompt into ChatGPT, spit out some options, and then think about like, oh, okay, well, what, how could I slightly adjust this to kind of fill it in and adjust it out? So we could do sentence starters. We could also do kind of fill in the blanks of like, okay, so here we've got our pH. I love that I don't think any of you picked these two to think about for your patterns. But here we've got this pH, like where do I want them to get to? I want them to see this threshold. So how can I create some kind of like fill in the blank sentences around their claims? Scaffolding, like what are pieces that we do or do not want in the claim? Now, I am going to say, in some ways, ChatGPT is great. And in other ways, I'm like, really? That is the claim that you think you would get out of that visualization? I've been playing around with like, how much information do you need to give in the prompt? Like if you describe the whole graph, what happens? It doesn't get any better. So just pulling out and thinking about like, what are the key pieces that you're hoping your students might pick up and get out of the graph is all you need to kind of put into this prompt. At least that's my case. I'm going to open it up in a second. We can kind of crowdsource, see if you guys are playing with this and what you guys are seeing with the visualizations. One thing I will say is that this kind of, can you give me 5 examples of like, right, we always want to kind of be so weird, chatting with the ChatGPT or whatever AI tool we're using in a question from a question phrase that creates better responses, and asking for multiple examples, right? If we're just saying like, can you do this? It will spit back one version. And in my experience, it's usually like pretty wonky. But once it gets a couple in, then I'm like, okay, now we're rolling. This actually, I put in when I was initially playing, I was starting to do it like, can you give me 8? Can you give me 5 to 8? Oh wait, this is good, that's bad, kind of training it a little bit down on what kinds of things we are looking for. Putting in some good claims, some claims that you would want to see out of the visualization could be another great way to train the AI tool in what you're looking for in terms of a resource out for your students of the like kind of fill in a blank type thing. We can do this for our claims. We can also do it for the evidence statements on sort of different ways. I just picked 2 options, fill in the blank and a sentence starter, as sort of some different prompts that we could pull out of ways of getting like, okay, ChatGPT in 2 seconds, can you produce some options that I can then build from, that I can sort of riff off of and adapt for what my students might need or where my students are struggling. I will say some of the work that I'm doing with a school district in Oregon is we're actually like putting in like, this is what we expected and this is what the students said. What are some suggested ways that we can help get them building out their claims and evidence statements more connected to the data visualization that we have? And it's all about just sort of playing with it. AI is a tool that we can play with. And it's a really good tool to like set a timer for and give yourselves like, okay, I got 5 minutes on my lunch break. Like, what are some crazy things that, you know, AI can give me back? And do they spark any ideas? Do they give me an example of what I can do that could be easier with my visualizations and helping my students through? And this is coming from that space of trying to recognize, like, it's not a linear process for our novices to look at a visualization and develop their conclusion or their CER, or their claims out of it. It's all these interconnected pieces coming in. So can we kind of leverage AI as a tool to spit out some example options for us as a way to support our students based on where they're getting stuck? Where are they having trouble making sense of the visualization, or specifically building out their claims, evidence, and reasoning statements? Okay, so those are some of my ideas. Now it's time for us to kind of reflect on those ideas, those pieces, and or think about, like, well, what are you doing? What's working for you? Are you using AI as a way to think about kind of coming at your students' hiccup points or your students' like stuck points with data visualizations? And we can share those out. So I'm going to encourage us to either share in the chat, or we can share in the shared resource document. We are down here on page 5 to think about kind of, so if there's a lot that goes in cognitively to actually make sense to interpret our data, what kinds of things could we adjust the support around asking for that claim? And are you using AI in that on-ramp, in that support of your students around making claims or conclusions? Okay, again, we each work with individual students, so we're going to do this independently, and we're going to kind of crowdsource our reflections and our thinkings, and then we'll open it up to some questions and comments and share outs about thinking about kind of where our goals are and where our reality is, and how we can use some strategies to move towards our goals from our reality with our students in making sense of data. Oh, there's some great thoughts, comments, questions coming into the shared resource document. I love it. So exciting to see. I love the idea of like, oh, like, let's use AI to build out some sentence starters, some fill in the blanks. It totally works for content too. Just want to highlight that it works for data visualizations. There's a great question in there that I see of, can AI identify differences in patterns? And I would say, if you'd asked me that question 6 weeks ago, I would have said no. At the moment, AI is still pretty clunky and sort of awkward when it comes to a like, I'm going to upload a graph and or a visualization and you interpret it for me. It was very much at the like, I can kind of like spit out alt text that will tell you the colors and the titles of the axes, things like that. Actually, AI is pretty similar to that like surface level we were talking about where our learners often are when they are looking at a graph, but not actually diving in. In the last few weeks, I've been starting to hear about some murmurings of some new offerings of AI where it's getting better at interpreting or like analyzing what's actually in the visualization in terms of the data points. And so like that's step one, right? Like describe, analyze the pattern. We got to get AI to get that step in, and then into the interpret. But the interpret's hard, right? Because the interpret requires understanding what your question is, what you're trying to actually ask of the data, why you're using that visualization as a tool for inquiry to explore something in the visualization. And so when I said at the beginning, like, even if AI is making sense of the data for you, a human always has to be involved. Our students, even though they will forever live in a space of more and more access to machine learning, artificial intelligence, all of these technologies that are my anticipation, like most technologies, it's just going to keep growing. We still need to help them build out the critical thinking skills of how to be a part of the process, of how to actually think about it and make sense of it, because AI can spit stuff out, but they don't know the broader context of why we are working with the data. So that the describe and analyze piece, it had been really bad, and now there are new things coming online soon that will get better, which opens up a whole can of worms or a whole other discussion of like, oh, so what does that mean when our students can just like upload a visualization that's part of their homework and get an AI to spit out some answer to it? That's a future conversation for us to have and think about once that resource is there and available and freely accessible to us and our students. But I just wanted to call out kind of that one piece of it. And I encourage you to jump in and look at these awesome reflections that you all are putting in or that your colleagues put in terms of thinking about kind of how to think about setting up our students for conclusions, because they are fantastic. Okay, I want to share just a couple sort of wrap up components and then share out some information about our workshop. I've talked about it a couple of times, sort of the boot camp where we like dive deeper into some of these things. If you are interested, great. If you're not interested, that is also great, but maybe you have a colleague that's interested, or I would just say, just stick with me for a couple of minutes because we'll open it up for questions before we wrap up at past, before we drop off and go back into our lives outside of this container of thinking about analyzing, interpreting data. So the 3 steps that we have talked about here today is thinking about reminding our students that working with data is a process, not a checklist, and that they need to actively be a part of it. And explicitly talking about that with our learners can have huge dividends in terms of them seeing data in a different way. We talked about kind of gut checking. Are our students familiar with the pattern? We talked through 5 common patterns before we're asking them to identify that pattern and interpret what it means for our content area that we are working with. So kind of taking a step or 2 back in that visual hierarchy and figuring out kind of where are our students at when it comes to the different patterns that they're seeing. And then what we just talked about is sort of this acknowledgement, this sort of holding space for the fact that CER with data is cognitively different than CER with prose. And so how are we setting our students up for success when they are working with data? So we talked through 2 strategies to kind of help this analyzing and interpreting. There are lots of others. There's also a lot that goes into actually making sense of data. It might, like, an hour and a half is a long amount of time. It's a large amount of time for us to take out of our lives, but this is just 2-3 three components of everything that goes in to actually making sense of data, to being data literate, to be able to fluently and confidently work with the data that we have, which is the goal of where we're trying to get our students to by the end of high school. Right? So like not in one activity, not in one unit, not in one year, but before our students graduate across this K to 12 spectrum that we're working on. And this is what I love doing. This is the space that I love sitting in that I was talking about at the beginning of like, how can we simplify it? How can I, knowing that you're super busy, offer you some round wheels so that we can use a few less square wheels as we're going through and helping our students build up these data skills with all of that other stuff that you have on your plate of to help your students make sense of. So we've developed this Data Trailblazers Bootcamp over the years. It has been largely influenced by what we have heard from teachers in terms of questions that come in and interests that they have and struggles that they are having with their students. We've built it out to be these bite-sized sessions. So it's a 3-day summer PD offering that we offer, but we try to chunk it into small sessions because 3 days is a really long amount of time. And we like need to create space to kind of take it in and process and think about it. And it's all focused on sort of low-hanging fruit to help your students get it more, get working with data even more. Each one needle shift, each small shift we can make will have huge return on investment for our students. So it's built out as 3 days of interactive hands-on. They are online sessions, so you don't need to fly. You can participate. We take lots of breaks. Trust me. We make those 3 days feel fun and not like we're in Zoom zombie land. We cover 7 common misconceptions that students have that they're getting stuck on that lead to some of that just sort of mechanically going through the motions and not getting to our goals of wanting students to be able to think about the stories from data. And we think about, knowing this is a progression, what is appropriate for your learners at their grade levels. And we use activities to explore this as learners, as adults together that can be turnkeyed. All the strategies are ready to be used in your classroom, and we have lots of discussions to think about planning and integrating it in. So we cover kind of why we use data and how to better use it, explore how to get students making graphs, identify what goes in. We dive deeper into that describe and analyze patterns that we just sort of briefly touched on with those 5 common patterns. And then on day 2, we jump in and think about why variability is so critical for our students to understand. Why it's so awesome for Laura's students to realize that average is not always what they should do with their data, but we should be looking at all of our data when we're thinking about the conclusions that we want to draw. And with that, kind of how do we explore like what is and how and why we can teach all of our students to think statistically, not calculate statistics, but think statistically, and why that's really important for our kindergartners up all the way through. And then we get sort of with that grounding, that foundation, we dive deeper into how can we help our students identify how can we identify ways that data are different than prose and really help push our students' conclusion drawing further. On the last day, we get to do lots of celebrations and lots of integration on kind of, how do we help our students communicate with and from data? What are the ranges of ways that we can get students actively engaged and participating in working with the data? And then our whole final session, the wonderful bonus session at the end that came out of teachers asking for it, is how can we plan this next step forward? How can we integrate this in and think about what are our 1-degree shifts going forward? And I think this says it really well of we try to break down information into these bite-sized chunks. And so Andre was with us last summer and he mentioned you break down the topics into manageable, comprehensible bundles. Even in a 3-day intensive on Zoom, we sort of break it down, providing those strategies and techniques to help your students make sense of data. Naomi's up in middle school and has gone through the boot camp as well. And she was saying getting students beyond the bar and the line graph, like we were talking about. They love those bar graphs. They love those bar charts. But now having kind of this broader picture of these different pieces helped her articulate the ideas so that the students could articulate those and extrapolate out from the data. So if you jump in now for this coming summer, we've got 2 runs of it this coming summer. You'll get a 45-minute one-on-one coaching session with me that you can identify when you want it to be. And we're just going to personalize even more what strategy you can take next year. So we can review your curriculum, we can look at specific activities, we can talk about overall, how do we want to plan, what makes the most sense for you. This is one of the big things that we offer in the 3-day intensive is the full scope and sequence. So when our schools and districts pay for this, it is a lot there. There's a lot to unpack, and you will have full access to this that you can bring back to your departments. And it sort of identifies what are the different skills that we should be teaching and how do they progress? How do we build those in for our students? So that's one of the bonuses that we'll be including this summer. And because you all are here, we would love to offer you 15% off to jumping into this 3-day workshop. So we've got a special discount code for you, friend15, because you've joined us in the strategy share out. And so would love to offer that up to you going forward. So all of these pieces, the 3-day boot camp, the 45-minute one-on-one rather than just a 30-minute one-on-one, the full scope and sequence, and this discount brings the total for the summer workshops, this 3-day intensive summer workshop, around $300 and just a bit over $330. And we would love for you to join us, jump in, participate, get more strategies if this works for you, or if you think colleagues might be interested, we encourage you. You can share the discount code with them too. That totally works. You can share the replay of this event and share the discount code with them. We're just interested in sort of creating space so that we can all work together and kind of build up our students' skills and build up the way, crowdsource how we can do this more easily and get our students more confident, more comfortable, so it takes less of our energy going forward. Because, oh man, building data skills, it's a marathon, not a sprint. So we got to think about kind of the long game of how we help our students get there. We talked through some strategies that hopefully give you like little nuggets that you can integrate in now for your students, for your learners this year, right now. But there are so many more that we couldn't unpack that I would love to share and love to connect with you on. If you want to join us this summer, that's fantastic. There's more information about it in the shared resource document. Would love to see you there. If you're like, I don't really know, that might not be for me, there's a link in the shared resource document. Book a call, would love to talk to you, get you another strategy this spring and support you out. So we've got a couple more minutes and would love to open it up to what are some questions, comments, ideas that are coming up that you all have that we can sort of create space and bring up right now before we go back to the rest of our lives. You can type it in the chat or you can unmute. Any questions that are bubbling up or any thoughts or ideas that are bubbling up for you about helping students analyze and interpret data?
I just want to say thanks, Kristen. As usual, you brought up some points that I hadn't considered yet. So now my brain is racing again.
Give yourself some time to integrate, time to process, not all at once. Don't do everything all at once. That's like just a recipe for us burning out and not fun, no fun at all. Well, thank you, Danelle. So wonderful that a couple nuggets dropped for you or sort of clicked into place. Super exciting to see. Laura, also excited to see the kind of intro to AI and starting to think about how to use AI with our visualizations. There's a treasure trove. We're playing with it. We're going to be sharing out some more on our Data Bites each week. Don, thanks for sharing out with colleagues. That's so fantastic. Really appreciate it. We will send out information in our kind of follow-up. You will be receiving, if you would like the replay to jump back in, or if you would like to pass that along to colleagues so that they can see some of the things that we talked through today. But it is a container. Please do not post that publicly absolutely 100%. This is not a public replay of this session, but if you've got a close colleague that you think it would resonate with, please share it with them. Just my whole goal is to be like, how can we simplify? How can we create personalized and actionable strategies? And how can we simplify teaching data skills for as many students as possible? Make your lives easier with all of the myriad of many things that you are doing. So thank you for taking an hour and a half out of your Monday. It was so wonderful to work with you all. I will hang out here if there are any other questions, personal questions that you might have. Otherwise, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. For those heading into the snowstorm, good luck with the snow. For those in whatever other wintry mix of kinds of weather that you have, good luck, enjoy, and you've got my contact information. Please reach out. I'm always here as a resource and appreciate everything you're doing. Thanks, everyone.